This is the Think Big session for August 25th for the testing group. Today is the Think Big part of Think Big, and we're going to be talking about code quality. That was the most upvoted of the Think Big issues on our board when I took a look on Friday. So let's go ahead and start. We have some prompt questions in here of what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the job to be done that this solves? I've dropped a tentative job in there, but no problem because I didn't get that far into my brainstorming. So why don't we start with the problem? What problem are we solving with code quality, or could we solve that we aren't today with the code quality feature? Well, James, it's a great feature, and Drew's going to talk too. Great.
I at a high level, I think it should be a useful tool in quantifying technical debt. Maybe technical debt of a very particular kind, but I've always found technical debt very hard to quantify and articulate and like recognize and have there as like, this is a problem and we should fix it and we're gonna, pay this off at some point. And so the more insight a tool can give me into, hey, remember, you took this shortcut like a year ago, the more can keep that package and report it to me, the better. So I can show to other people like, hey, this is important. Remember, we took on all this debt. Like, let's not forget about it.
I think James froze, but I agree. I was also thinking, along with technical debt, it also helps you avoid future technical debt by showing you on your merge requests, like, hey, you're not using best practices that we've decided on as a team to use for this code quality, using this code quality tool. Oh, he's gone.
That is much more proactive of a strategy, and I appreciate that. Like, if it's easy technical debt, just don't do it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so how do you think the things that you are talking about are different or the same than the job to be done that James picked out, which is when I'm writing code for a project, I want that code to be scanned for issues like duplication and not following standards, so it's easier to read by others making contributions.
Seems about be in line. We just repeated it with more words.
I think with more generality too. I think James's job to be done is like calls out stuff like duplication as being very specific. Well, calls out things like duplication, which is more specific. And so I guess the more kinds of quality issues we can capture and quantify, the more sophisticated the tool will be and the more of your debt it will be able to report for you.
A difference I saw between the job to be done that's listed and what Scott and Drew both said is they applied it to themselves as developers as opposed to applying it to someone else, the so phrase within the jobs to be done. So it is easier to read by others making contributions. I think the so clause is different in this particular category. It's so I can make better decisions about the code that I'm trying to merge, or so I can communicate better with the team about our technical debt that we've taken on, or so I can manage the technical debt that I already have.
You're so phrasing in that, in there, is that all as the developer, Zeph?
Yeah, that was just following up on Drew's and Scott's comments. They both And correct me if I'm incorrect, but it seemed like you all were applying it to how you would use it personally as a developer, right? Or did I not get that? Okay.
Yes.
So I guess the question is, besides the developer, who are the people that are using a code quality report? Why would, is there something a manager would use a code quality report for?
I think speaking from like a manager or the director level, I think the individual pieces of code quality probably matter less unless they are like security vulnerabilities or like this is like risk. Like as soon as you can quantify the quality of the code and how much risk exists in the code base, it's probably what matters more to the director or the manager level. So if there's like a critical security vulnerability that the code quality report is surfacing, that's some risk. That's something that I'm going to care about as a manager, as a director. But if it's just like, oh, well, you didn't Yoda style your if statement, that's like, I really could care less about whether you Yoda style your if statement or not. The other thing that would kind of bubble up into risk for the manager and director persona would be if there's just an atrociously huge number of violations in the code quality report. Like I kind of want to see that bird's eye view of like, okay, this project has a really large problem with code quality because there's 20,000 different things in the report. So that's a sign to me as a manager director. We need to spend some time. That's a good signal to me that we need to spend some time paying down that technical debt so that we can move forward, particularly when I'm looking at that information in conjunction with other things that I know to be true, like the MR rate for that project is lower, or the mean time to merge for merge requests that go into that project is really high compared to other projects. Like that's one data point that I can use to try and explain why the performance of that project or the performance of the engineers on that project are different than other projects.
Ricky, I'm curious, would you ever use that data in comparison to other groups to see where your developers lie versus what the company is doing?
I think I would, but I wouldn't necessarily, that wouldn't be my only data point, right? Like there's a lot of other things that I would consider as factors as well. If there's another team that was doing really well on those reports, that's probably something that I'd want to look into. Like maybe they have different rules defined, and so they're just ignoring a lot of these different things. Or maybe they have a different process that my team isn't following, so I can see what they're doing differently to my team in order to pick and choose what processes I can use that would best help. But that's also not everything. Like code quality isn't everything. Like fundamentally, what any business probably wants to do at the end of the day is make money. And if my project's making way more money than another project, but there's more technical debt, then and I'm not saying I would ignore it. I'm just saying that like that's the priority would be different. I don't think I would ever look at code quality in isolation. It would just be one of a number of factors that I'd consider when looking at a code base. Does anybody else have an idea of what a manager might use a code quality report for?
I'm sure it could be used for showing to investors, like, hey, just another statistic to show our code base is this large. We have this many merge requests going in a week, but still our code quality report shows that it's a very high quality code base, even though we're going at this pace. Just another statistic to add to the investor pitch, or showing investors that we're doing well.
I think the other
That-
persona we might want to think about is the use case would be product manager, engineering manager, having the discussion about paying down tech debt versus new features. Because if you can start to make that correlation across a bunch of projects in a group of these projects have low code or have high code quality rather, and high MR rates, so we're able to contribute to them faster. This project that is really important to us 6 months down the road, we need to start paying down that tech debt so that we can have a great MR rate at the time and that we can introduce those features faster. I think that it can contribute to that conversation. It helps a product manager understand if you see those two data points together, oh, now I see why code quality matters, why tech debt matters. Even though there's not bugs or there's not performance problems, if it's hard to contribute to a code base, it means that features get out slower. I think I've actually written up that problem statement 3 or 4 times in some of the code quality issues that we have.
Yeah, I like that too. I like Scott's kind of using that as another control when talking about speed, because I think that's something that comes up a lot. It's even for MR rate and stuff like that. You kind of want to have a controlling statistic. So you're not just totally gaming the system, right? Like, oh, well, our MR rate's really high, but our unit test coverage is the one that I think of most often as being the control for that. It's like, well, our MR rate's really high, but we also have really high code coverage. And then having another control and our code quality is really high as defined by X. I think that's a good call out by Scott to kind of have that controlling statistic on top of another statistic. That's what I keep in these conversations. I keep trying to articulate that, like, I'm never, and I think James, you hear this a lot from customers, from what I understand, but it's never like I just want that one statistic. It's like, no, I want to see these 10 things together, and then I want to interpret what that says. Like, I want to, okay, I see my MR rate, I see my code quality, I see my test coverage, I see my CI minutes, I see how long it takes to get something out into production, and then I can kind of take all those data points together and figure out what my next steps are as a director or as a manager.
Yep. Yeah, they want a bunch of inputs into maybe one score that they can see trending over time, but they want to understand what those inputs are.
Yeah, and
right.
I think that's what everyone says, but I don't really think that they mean it, because as soon as you roll it up into that one score, you lose the insight, right? Like if you just say, like, well, we're going to make a team performance index and the TPI score this week is 2.4. It's like, okay, but like what goes into that? Like what decisions can I make? Is 2.4 good? Like, yeah. Like what do I need to change in order to get that to 2.8? Like that score by itself is meaningless until you have like a blurb at the bottom that's just like, oh, it's because your code quality is so poor. You need to up your code quality on these 3 projects to bump up your TPI score. But like, that's still like, what does TPI even mean at that point?
Yeah.
You know,
I think there's some personas that want that score and they don't necessarily care, but that's at like your VP of engineering or chief tech officer is presenting to the board showing overall, like here are the features we've released, and then here's the quality of our code base. And then as you start drilling down into meetings of direct reports, then you start peeling apart the layers and understanding, oh, well, we just need to improve our code coverage and our code quality, because those feed into that larger score maybe. All right, before my connection drops again, I feel like we have a good idea of the problem. Who has that problem or is doing the job of looking at this code quality score?
I think we covered that in the previous section. We kind of outlined how it would affect ICs through EMs and directors and VPs. But what about the kind of non-IC roles? Like what about the SETs and the quality folks and designers, and like how does code quality impact them, if at all? Is a question I have.
I can answer how we use it from an SET perspective, and that's really just to try to help identify risk. If I see a project that has low code quality or something, or a specific MR that has low code quality, that tells me I'm going to have to pay more attention to what kind of tests we have in there, make sure we have better coverage. And it just gives me some general insight into where I might have to be more aware and possibly have to do a little more work from a quality perspective. But it doesn't map one-to-one to quality in general. Code coverage isn't quality. It's just an indicator. So it's just a data point that we use from an SET perspective. I don't think everybody uses it though. So if it is there and it's easy to access and easy to understand, that's the other problem the SETs have. So we typically have one SET for, I think our ratio is like 1 to 10 right now. So developers might work on, they do a lot, but they're able to focus on some key features, whereas some SETs have to focus on every feature and understand it at that level. So making it easy to digest is important from an SET perspective, because that's why we end up ignoring things sometimes, because we just don't have the mental bandwidth to do all that context switching.
All right, so if we stepped outside of the IC and picked a different persona for this, what do we think is going to be the most interesting before we talk about what their ideal outcome would be?
I would probably pick some of the more interesting, because that is where code quality, I think, would more inform like overarching strategy. You know, it's relatively easy for me as a developer to go through and be like, oh, these are violations, I can fix them, and there's, you know, green on charts and everything. But it's code quality in the context of other things, to say like, why is this important? Like, why as an organization or group are we going to focus on this? And it's because it translates out here. So code quality is important for this, or not important for this other thing. So seeing it in context and saying like what code quality can be, what code quality has leverage over, is interesting to me.
Right, so if we take that manager, director, VP role, if they had some sort of code quality view in GitLab, so they're looking at multiple projects or even multiple groups, what's their ideal outcome?
I think you're going to have to find the right level, James, between having it be a high enough level number, but still a low enough level indicator to be able to take action on. You're going to have to look at this and be able to walk away and say, I need to take this particular action on it. Just having a one key number, it might be great at a VP level, but for it to make a change within the business, people need to take action, be able to take action on it.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I agree with that idea. It's almost like we want, like, we were talking to quality a lot about having that magic project page where everything gets rolled up into that page, and they can see the slow tests, and they can see the failure rates, and they can see all this stuff that's really important to quality and managers at a project level. And then it seems like this could be a contributing factor onto that magic project page where we just have all this information about the health of your code base. But also, it seems like we're talking about having that next level page, what we were talking about. We've talked about this a lot, like with group code coverage and stuff like that, where maybe we need that magical group page that kind of rolls everything up. So, okay, these are the projects that are consuming the most CI minutes, and these are the projects with the lowest code quality, and these are the projects that are getting the highest MR rates, and this is their code quality, and that kind of like super dashboard of the numbers that we think are important to keep track of when you're using all the features of GitLab.
So if I were to take a stab at summing that up poorly, I would say I want a view of some key indicators of the health of my teams and how changing code quality will positively impact those. So like the example being MR rate. If I can see that there's a correlation between low MR rates and low code quality in projects that my teams work on, then I want to be able to see that and then work with those teams to help improve their code quality, because it will result in higher MR rates.
I think so, but I also think that that's just one, probably, I don't know if it's a leading or a lagging indicator of the problem. Like there could be multiple factors that contribute to the problem of low MR rate. And so just surfacing that one indicator on a page, like if we had like a code quality page at the group level, I don't think that would be useful in isolation.
Yeah, no, sorry, my example was I can start to pick some things and put them together within GitLab. So I can look at code quality and MR rate, or I could look at code quality and say browser performance. Maybe there's a correlation there where our load code quality results in slow page loads or load testing. And we're seeing that in groups where they have a high code quality score, they also have great performance. And it could be a total red herring, but I think it's interesting to give your manager, your director, some drag and drop ability maybe to say, hey, compare these two things across my groups and see where there's correlations are. Not to say there's causation, but maybe high code quality, is a leading indicator of or a contributing factor to better performance of either the team or the software. And maybe code quality isn't the only input on that left side of that. There could be other things like code coverage or percentage test passing or et cetera, et cetera.
So then we're kind of now back to like making some sort of really customizable dashboarding software built in, which is not, I think, maybe not super in line with our priorities as a business.
Yeah, it feels like I just got us out of our lane really fast. It also doesn't speak to like the risk factor that we talked about earlier of, does this give me confidence that we don't have risk when we release this code? Is there a bigger vision or ideal outcome that a director might have in that regard?
Sorry, can you repeat?
So when we started, we talked a little bit about how a high code quality score might be indicative of there's not as much risk in this code. We see that manifested for the IC in my code reviews are maybe smoother, for the SETs as I don't have to maybe pay as much attention and really test around the edges here if there's a high quality score. But for a director then, what does that mean? If you're tracking the quality of a project over time? Is it an indicator of we shouldn't release this? Is it an indicator of, hey, maybe we're going to have bugs in the future? Are there other signals that they might get? Or is there another outcome or really whiz-bang cool feature that they would want out of a quality score or out of this category? Let's back away from score because that's just kind of one component.
Yeah, it seems like summing things up into how risky they are is important. So if at a group level you knew which projects contained the most risk due to potential vulnerabilities, due to code quality, due to rate of change, due to, like, if something doesn't deploy very often, but it's still a critical business function and the code quality is low, and there's a CVE out on a dependency that hasn't been updated on the package, I'm going to look at that as a director or manager persona and be a little bit nervous about the next time we have to go and release that to production.
Mm-hmm.
I know we have just a few minutes ago, we maybe backed away a little bit from becoming full-blown SciSense. But I do think there's something to be, I think there's an argument for a customizable kind of view into this, because I'm not sure that the answer is going to be the same for different groups. You know, GitLab is a particular organization, right, with a bunch of internal contributors and external contributors. And we might find that code quality for us is a huge factor in time to merge, right, our review speed. But for a smaller organization, that might not matter. And so we might have to give a group the flexibility to kind of figure out, you know, what does code quality mean for you, you know, arbitrary group of people, and then use it accordingly. Like risk, I think, is a hard one-size-fits-all measurement. You know, like, so whether it's how often we deploy, how often, you know, bugs are introduced, like, I don't know that we're going to get to one answer.
So I'm brainstorming about 7 other things, none of which fit into our category. They fit nicely into plan or create or release, but all of them boil down to, wouldn't it be great if some of the signals out of your testing and your static analysis were able to be used in other parts of the app? Like, as you're estimating, you can say, hey, you're estimating issues in a project that has really low code coverage and a really low code quality score. Your weights might need to be higher, or the time to do these issues might be longer. And that's just a signal at the project level. Or the same thing on the release side of, hey, you're planning a release for a project that has really low code quality, but really high, you know, coverage, or really high coverage and really high churn, something like that. So it might be risky. It might just take you longer. And it's just a signal that we're providing out to those other parts of the app.
I wonder if folks are going to know what they want to use the data for if we don't just get the data out there.
Yeah.
So the question is, how can we just get the data out there? I mean, can we do even a testing specific dashboard, not turning into SciSense, but just collecting all of our test metrics into one place?
Yeah, maybe we just take that view and say, hey, here's the data out of testing. around some of the signals we have today, quality, coverage, maybe get churn into that as well. And the things this may mean to you, it's just some boilerplate there, and stick it at the project or the group level.
I think that's what we kind of have going on with the repository analytics, for example. It
Yeah.
seems like a reasonable page to roll these things up into. So I think we are on that path. It'd be interesting to figure out how to quantify code quality for that page in a way that would be similarly valuable to having that code coverage graph. Like, how could you take X violations of various severities with various different remediations, some of which, like, let's assume that you've set up your code quality perfectly and you want to care about each one of those things, which is already a big assumption. How can I roll all that up into a graph that somebody would get value from?
Mm-hmm.
I think Drew kind of touched on that. Everybody's going to be using this data differently. It's going to mean different things to different people. So I think the first step might just be provide the data. These are the failures. These are the things that we are uncovering in code quality and everything else that we're doing within testing. What it means to you is up for you to decide.
I think we do already do that with like the full code quality report on the pipeline. Like, we present the whole thing, but how can I make that more meaningful to someone who wants to look at the project as a whole in conjunction with other factors, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to click on the code quality report, I'm going to click on the test report, I'm going to go click on this thing to check the coverage, and I'm going to go click on this other analytics page to check the MR rates. And you know what I mean? Like, how can we kind of tighten that up?
Well, we are almost 5 minutes over.
One chart to rule them all.
One chart to rule them all, yeah. Keep pondering on that. Drop some ideas for what that outcome might look like into the issue, or into the doc. It's linked in there. And we can iterate on those over the week, synchronous or asynchronously, and come back next week to talk about the think small part of this. And if we end up on something totally different and want to address the IC instead, we can totally do that too. So
yeah, I typed something in here yesterday, but I think it's also going to be an important decision to make whether we want to start managing state of the code quality violations in the product. Like, do we want to take a step towards doing what SonarQube does, or towards doing what Code Climate does as an application, where you actually have, like, maybe we create issues out of it and then we track the fingerprint in the report to the issue, so that when that issue gets closed, we can kind of like wrap everything up into a nice bow? Is that like where we want to go? Do we want to turn GitLab into a stateful code quality management platform, or do we want to do the opposite thing and encourage them to set up their own stateful code quality thing and then set up integrations there?
I think we have an opportunity to leverage hosting the source and being the CI to do the former of be an all-in-one. I think it's interesting for us to put be the tool that can, or that is really differentiated, and be a replacement for things like SonarQube. From a product direction anyway.
On the latter option, it would probably be, I think if we just kind of acted as the aggregator and sat on top of all these existing tools and offered a little bit of guidance on, here's how you can use SonarQube, like here's what that might mean to you. And you know, we're going to help you figure out that SonarQube is actually important to your organization and it's worth this much to you, or that your code climate report is not, you know, like, what does it mean for me to high level people? I think could be a really interesting, a really valuable tool to the like buyer personas that we're going after in paid groups.
Cool. All right, well, we will end on that note. Yeah, continue to drop thoughts into the doc and the issue. Sorry for going over. Thank you for hanging on and continuing the discussion. This was a good one.
Thanks. Take care.
Cheers.